particularly by the Rebbe always put a very big emphasis on names. So Pesach has 3 names. In the Torah, it's called matzos. In our prayers, which come from the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, which is Torah about that, it's called Zman Cherusenu, season of our freedom. And our sages, and this is also the way everybody refers to it in common speech, called Pesach. So each one of these names tells us something about Pesach, and the order is also a lesson. In fact, this is in the Torah, and this is season of our freedom is in our prayers, and this is just everyday speech. That order is also significant. Okay. To understand what the significance of these names are and how they teach us, Rebbe goes back to Prophet Yecheskel. Yecheskel says Pesach is birth of Am Yisrael. The time when our nation became a nation, we're born. Now, the idea of birth is significant. Well, it's not just July 4th, Independence Day. Independence means like you existed before, and then you became free. Other nations have this concept of Independence Day, becoming free. Birth means something entirely different. Birth means a new entity, something that was not there beforehand at all. In other words, freedom is, you were there, but you weren't free. Now you became free, your free expression, the ability to do what you want. Birth means you weren't there. Why? What is he trying to say here? We get that from the Lashon which the Torah uses, from the wording the Torah uses, when Hashem promised the Bnei Yisrael so that they would be freed from Egypt. He tells Moshe Rabbeinu, he tells Moshe, when you take these people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. In other words, the whole idea of Pesach is connected with Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. And that's why Pesach isn't really complete until Shavuos. Sukkot has its last day. Simchas Torah comes right afterwards, and it's a whole different holiday. Simchas Torah. It's not the same thing as it's not just the last day of Sukkot. It's got its own thing. The last day of Pesach, as it were, is Shavuos. Why? Because the two are connected. It's the giving of the Torah that defines when the Jews become a nation. Why? Because that's what it says here. What defines our people as a whole and every Jew individually? Their existence, the nation existence is the Torah. The birth of the Jewish people is connected with their becoming a Torah nation. Why? What happened? What makes a Torah nation different than beforehand? So because it's not that before they were in an extremely low spiritual state. They had fallen into the 49 gates of impurity, and they couldn't receive the Torah until then. Now, that's also true. I mean, they were on a very low level, and they got lifted up and elevated and received the Torah. But something fundamentally different happened. The giving of the Torah brought about a total metamorphosis between the Jewish people, within the Jewish people, because what the Torah really is, the Torah transcends humanity, no matter how lowly or or how lofty a person is, he's not Torah. Torah is something connected intimately with God. We find that Torah is called the beloved infant, close to him, his delight every day, a cherished treasure concealed by God. In other words, Torah is something intimately bound with God, something which God takes pleasure in, and which is connected with Him as Him. As such, for the Jews as they exist in this material world, certainly as they existed in Egypt, it was a total novelty, something beyond their frame of reference. In other words, getting the Torah brought about a totally new situation, something which they were not shy at all, wasn't in their world. It wasn't just a little bit higher. It wasn't in their world. When the Jews became a Torah nation, they became God's people, connected with Him through His Torah, essence to essence. That didn't exist before them. Yes, they were children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They had miracles. God took care of them. All fine and good. They were not His chosen nation yet. They were not defined as this people are God's people. So these three names, the festival of matzos, the season of our freedom, the festival of Pesach, express specifically and in that order three motifs that are necessary to bring about the transformation of an existing entity into a new entity of an incomparably higher nature. And this is what we have to do. God took a people and He made them something different, something entirely different, and something totally incomparable one to the other. So He now starts to explain these three stages. First one we said is Chag HaMatzos. Now, Chag HaMatzos means matzah. So he's teaching us something fundamental about matzah. What's the first thing you know about matzah? It lies flat. It doesn't rise up. What's the stage in that? What's the comparable thing in human nature to matzahs? We're on page 3 already. What's the comparable thing to matzahs in human nature? Ito. He gives an example. Students sitting before a teacher. Now, before we get into exactly what he says, we have to understand we're talking about not an ordinary student and not an ordinary teacher, but something, an entirely different relationship. What do I mean? He's going to say in a second, to receive from a teacher, the student has got to sit there in dread, nullify his previous understanding entirely, be a total makabel, a recipient, taking his own mind out of that. Now, we're all intelligent people. When you want to learn something new, you usually don't work that way. You usually build on what you know, and from what you know, you go to, a deeper and a higher understanding. But I know 10, and I've got to get to 11, and 20, and 30. I'm building on what I have. And a teacher also, this teacher knows more than me. He understands things a little better. He's worked it out and defined it in his own mind a little bit more. But still, we're basically on the same level. I understand him, he understands me. We can talk to each other. That is what we're talking about here. We're talking about a teacher who, when you stand before him, you want to sink through the cracks in the floor because he's just oh, something totally different. I don't understand this type of person. If it's a whole, in Chassidus all the time, there's whole classic examples about how when a teacher has to give over to a student, he's got to take his own mind out of the picture entirely, think of it, and not think of it the way he understands it all, go through a tzimtzum, and the student has to go through this. Most of the times, teacher-student relationship doesn't work that way. And you talk to, you're on the same level, you're sharing something that you have, you know more, you know less, but it's a straight relationship. Here, listen to what he says here. A teacher conveys a new concept to a student, one the student could not conceive of on his own. Now, not just something that's just a little bit different, the student could not conceive of it. It's out of his frame of reference. The concept was new not only because he had not heard before, but because it transcends his intellectual frame of reference. The teacher is conveying something that would otherwise be entirely beyond his grasp. We're learning this. That wouldn't apply here because we're talking about, you can understand this. No. We're talking about changing the way a person thinks. Now, the classic thing, you can give a person a fish, but you can teach him how to fish. You can teach, a real good teacher doesn't convey information. He changes the student's thinking processes. I've had several good, outstanding teachers in my life, both in Chassidus and Nigla. Every one of those outstanding teachers taught me how to think differently, a way of thinking that I would not have gotten to on my own. That's what we're talking about here. Somebody who takes the way you think and shifts it into a different gear entirely. So the first thing that's required of a student to begin the process of teaching this type of new idea is an approach of bitul, self-nullification. You've got to give up entirely. This indicated by Sage's statement: when a Torah scholar sits before his teacher, his lips must drip myrrh. Myrrh is a fragrant fragrance, shares its root letters with mar, bitterness. A student sitting before his teacher must feel bitterness stemming from dread. Just an awe. Like I said, you've got to slip through the cracks. You must feel utterly humble in the presence of a person whose understanding entirely transcends his own. Since this new concept transcends his frame of reference, the student cannot grasp with his own mind and power. Instead, is specifically bitul, going beyond his own existence, as a medium to make this possible. To borrow a phrase from our sages, an empty vessel can hold. You want to pour something into a cup, and make sure the cup is empty. If the cup is full, then he can't pour anything new into it. Now again, there is an idea in the Talmud that also says clean boiling boxing. Because like I said, a certain level of knowledge, the more you know, the more you can know. But here we're talking about something different. There's a story in the Gemara. The Gemara says that this Rabbi Zera was a great Talmud in Babylon. He was one of the leaders of the academy in Babylonia, taught, studied, was regarded very highly. For whatever reason, I don't remember the exact reasons, he was going to Eretz Yisrael. And in Eretz Yisrael, they studied the Gemara, they studied Talmud very differently. In Babel, there was back and forth questions. In Yerushalayim, in Eretz Yisrael, there was a whole different process of just teaching straight. And Since Rebbe Zera fasted 40, or according to another interpretation, 100 fasts, in order to forget the Talmud Bavli, so he could start to learn Talmud Yerushalmi. Now, wait a second. Forget your knowledge to learn? When have you ever seen that? But when you forget, when does that apply? When your whole approach has to change. And that's a whole, again, as I said, this is a very different type of learning that we used to. And it's important to sense that difference. Because, on the contrary, if you just believe everything that's written, this makes a lot of sense, just read it, okay, this is what it says. When you start to think about it, no. Forget in order to know. Bitul, to grasp, but because we're talking about a whole different way of thinking. Not just ordinary concepts, changing the way your mind works. So that's the first thing. So, bitul, empty thing, matzah. Matzah lies flat. None of your own self involved. However, afterwards, once the student gets the idea in bitul, he's got to internalize it. This requires using his own mind, involving himself in his powers. In other words, together with the approach of being an empty vessel that holds, he must nevertheless become a kli, more precisely a perfect kli, that damages no positive functionality. The approach of bitul is not sufficient. The student must apply himself to the idea, endeavoring to become a kli, an entity that receives and holds. The purpose of this learning process is that the student ultimately attain the understanding of his master. In other words, even though on one hand we just said the master is on a totally different framework, he's not supposed to stay totally different. In other words, why is he teaching? Because he wants to teach you to be like him, to think like him. There's a classic Mishnah. When we started picking up soon. Rebbe ben Zakkai had two students, Eliezer ben Horkonis and Eliezer ben Arach. Says Eliezer ben Horkonis, bore seed she'enu ma'am beitipa, a cemented cistern that doesn't lose a drop. In other words, whatever Rebbe Yochanan taught, he got. But what did he do? He just accepted. He was able to be a perfect parrot, telling you a tape, telling you exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said. What does Eliezer ben Arach? Kamayim miskaber, an ever-flowing free is spring. What's an ever-flowing spring? It's not the same it was before. It continues flowing forward. Eliezer ben Arach he's teaching you not what he taught, but what he would teach. In other words, if you would put yourself in a new situation, if Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was in a new situation which he'd never spoken about, those ben Horkonis, I'm going through my files. He didn't say anything about this. He doesn't know what to do because he's just the recipient, the cemented cistern which doesn't lose a drop. That's when the Arach was, I'm an ever-flowing spring. Rebbe Yochanan taught me how he thinks. That's what we're talking about here. That the student becomes the Rebbe. The student becomes the teacher. He gets the same framework of thinking that the teacher has. So this is here. Purpose of the student ultimately contain the sense of his master. Therefore, from the outset, the student is conscious of this objective. It's got to be pointed in that direction. You've got to realize that the teacher is going to change over your mind, and you want that. True, in his present state, he's not on a level which you can appreciate the same as teacher. For that reason, the teacher must convey to the student a contracted version of the concept, one the student's mind can grasp, while the depth of the idea, how the teacher perceives it, is merely contained in a hidden manner in the contracted version. It's like the Mishnah. The whole Gemara is in the Mishnah, but you don't see it. In the same way, this teacher won't give you everything, but he gives you the roadmap to allow you to unfold it afterwards. Now the student must be directed to the ultimate goal. From the outset, the student's approach must be characterized by the desire to go beyond the borders of his own mind and elevate his understanding to that of the teacher. And specifically to such an approach that ultimately will attain the understanding of his master, which is at a entirely lofty plane. In other words, we have two stages here. First, bitul, and then knowledge. Knowledge, though, comes after the bitul. Okay, now we have a long parenthetic statement. I'm losing my voice and I don't want to go a little further, but I'll just say the start of it outside, and then we'll read it inside. It says, the story of the Gemara. Rebbe, before he began the shir, he would tell a joke. A lot of lecturers, a lot of rabbis, the first thing they do, tell a story, tell a joke. Somehow I don't do that. If I should. but they start, they start with something, a story, a joke, something which establishes a rapport straight away. So wait a second, is that an approach of dread? That's the Rebbe's question here. Take a look further here.
Motivating a student. On the surface, this process that first comes, bitterness and dread, the approach of bitul, and afterwards the progression of becoming a kli, an entity, fashioned by the instruction of the teacher, appears questionable. The Talmud states that before Rabbah began instructing the rabbis, he made a humorous remark, and the rabbis left. Afterwards, he sat in awe and began the lesson. From Rabbah's conduct, we see that when trying to teach a new concept to a student, the pattern is that the teacher must open the hearts of the students before beginning his instructions. This enables each of them to become a fit, kli, to understand the lesson. Only afterwards did Rabbah sit in awe with fear and bitul. This does not contradict the need for a student to adopt an approach of bitul at the outset, as mentioned previously. Making a humorous remark before beginning to instruct the rabbis was merely a general preparation for the process of study as a whole. However, it was not part of the study itself, i.e., it was not a stage in the transmission of the lesson.
In other words, he just gave us the answer. Rabbis told a joke. We just said he's supposed to sit in awe. No, he told the joke before he started teaching. When he started teaching, he sat in awe, and the students sat in awe. But beforehand, there had to be rapport. So the stages go, yes, on one hand you want to start with bitul, but on the other hand, when you start with bitul, as step one comes after, before you go to first grade, you go to kindergarten, nursery, school, etc. Bitul is first grade. Well before that, the student and the teacher have to have a relationship, and that's the joke. That's the rapport. And it's like, that's so important. Like a lot of people, their memories of yeshiva are, gee, all the guy did was try to make me scared. Because they were lacking this initial developing the rapport. Okay, so this is the point he's trying to develop here, that first you do step one is bitul, but there's a step before step one, and that's the humorous response. In other words, take us further.
In other words, Rebbe did not intend to make his listeners fit kelim to accept his teaching by making a humorous remark. His goal was to create within them a desire to become recipients, i.e. to establish a channel of communication so that their minds would adopt a model of acceptance that would motivate them to reach beyond their present frame of reference. However, the relationship and connection between the teacher and the students, which is associated with conveying the concept to the students, first begins with the teacher sits in awe and begins the lesson.
Take the next little bit here.
Getting the timing right. According to this explanation, we can also understand the order reflected in our sage's statement. The left should always be in the hand that pushes away, and the right that draws near. From the order of their wording, it's apparent always the initial step must be the left hand that pushes away. Afterwards comes the right hand that draws near.
What was? Let me catch Isaac up in brief. You say that we have three names for Pesach. The Torah says matzos. Then in Tefillah, in prayer, we call it Zman Chevasenu. And then it's called, in our normal speech, we call it Pesach. These are three stages. Why we need three stages? Because at Pesach time, Pesach is connected with Shavuos. Through Pesach and the giving of the Torah, Jews became an entirely new entity. They weren't just now we became free. They became bonded up with Hashem, Hashem's chosen people. They were given His Torah. The Torah became part of them. Totally different attitude on that by now. So the three stages are necessary. Pesach, Zman Chevasenu, Chag HaMatzos, Zman Chevasenu, and Pesach, to teach you how to become this new entity. What's the first stage? Chag HaMatzos. What is matzah? Lie flat. Just give yourself, none of yourself at all. You're flat. Give yourself over to Hashem entirely. Why give yourself over to Hashem entirely? Because when you want to become something new, you got to give up everything old. It just works that way. The more if you hold on to what you have, you can't be something new. As we said before Rebbe Zera, when he wanted to learn when he came from Babylon to Eretz Yisrael, he wanted to learn Talmud Yerushalmi. He fasted to forget the Talmud Babel. Why? Because this wasn't just a progression from one step to another. When it's progression from one step to another, you rely on your previous wisdom. When you're going to get something new, you better forget. Empty your mind and take on the new.
So that's the matzah part.
Well, yeah, that's the matzah. Then he goes to the second. He asks on that. How do we say the first step has to be emptying your mind? We find that when Rebbe would say a shir, first he'd tell a joke, and then he'd sit sternly. The students would sit sternly, and he'd start to sit. So we see that before, that matzah isn't the first step. So the Rebbe says, no. Rebbe wasn't teaching then. The teaching came afterwards. First grade was first grade. But before you got to first grade, you did kindergarten and nursery school. In other words, he had to tell a joke to get the students involved, to establish rapport, to make a relationship. That students would desire to take on this new understanding he was going to give them. But the understanding itself, the first step is bitul. Now he's going back over that idea. He says, the Gemara says first there should be small docha, the left hand pushes away, the right hand draws close. Now, he's going to ask about that order because it looks a little bit strange. Now, what's the first thing usually? You draw people close, and then occasionally you have to know there's certain limits and certain boundaries. Yeah, so I've got to have the left hand. But the first of the surface is right. So it continues moving forward. Note this teacher is emphasizing.
Note that this teaching is emphasizing that one must push away only with the left, the weaker hand, and draw close with the right, stronger hand.
It's like, yeah, that's the first. Before, we'll get into the order in a second, but let's say just by the way, realize that pushing away is always with the weaker hand, and drawing close is always with the stronger hand. That's a very important thing. Go further.
However, this teaching raises a question similar to the matter discussed previously. How does the order mentioned fit the description of Rabbi's letter? But before beginning his instruction, he would make a humorous remark. And after drew the students close, and only afterwards he would sit in awe, reflecting the opposite approach. Furthermore, there is a general principle in Jewish law that the right hand deserves precedence over the left. Here, by contrast, the left hand comes before the right. The question is intensified by considering its context. After the statement, the left should always be the hand that pushes away, and the right hand that draws near, the Talmud continues regarding the natural inclination and the child and the woman. The left hand should push away, and the right hand should draw near. Now,
Wait a second. Just think about that for a second. It says, when you're teaching a kid, when you want to deal with your wife, what's the first thing you do? Push away. That one just won't work. And it's, so now he doesn't mention the wife relationship. He does that a little bit after in the extensive footnotes here. Mentions this slightly. But the main thing is students. Because that's the clearest thing. Ram speaks about students, says it's the first thing you do with students, you reward them and make them, So take it further.
now, the manner in which a child is encouraged to study is by giving him items that he cherishes because of his tender years. He should be told, read and I will give you warnings. As Rambam elaborates,
You'll get a prize for studying.
As Rambam elaborates in his commentary on the Mishnah. From this, it is understood that for a child, the right hand that draws close must precede the left hand that pushes away. This can be seen in actual fact. If one first comes to a child with the approach of the left hand that pushes away, it can repel him from studying in Torah.
How many times have we seen that happen? With our own children, with our own selves. You have a teacher who didn't allow you to feel good, feel comfortable in class, put your kid through struggles and difficulty. The kid never went back. You never went back. So what are we saying here? The left hands go first.
However, from the explanation in section 4, we can understand how to resolve this matter. The teaching, the left should always speaks only about the order which one should employ when actually working with another person to bring about change within him. There, the order must be that first the left hand pushes away, and afterwards the right hand draws close, as stated in sections 3 to 4. However, this teaching is not speaking about the action of the right hand that draws close, because that comes as a necessary preparation and introduction before one conveys the teaching.
So we went back to exactly what we just said before. First, in the actual teaching, then you have to really make the student appreciate he's got to change. And that requires structure. But when it comes to, and then afterwards you'll draw close again. But before you even start teaching, you've got to establish the relationship with the right hand which draws close. That's the point that I was bringing out. The initial effort.
But the initial effort resembles making a humorous remark to open the student's cards, or encouraging an immature student with items he cherishes, which comes even before the action of the left hand.
Okay. Now we start to answer the question. Take a little bit.
The three stages in metamorphosis of our people's identity. Just as these three motifs are necessary when learning a new concept, as explained in section 3, similarly, and even more so, they apply when it comes to altering a person's existence entirely to the extent that he becomes a new being. In the same way, regarding the matter under discussion, the birth of the Jews as a people culminated and was consummated by them serving God on a mountain, is connected, as explained in section 2, is connected with these three motifs. In order for the Jews to receive the Torah, they had to serve, i.e., labor and toil to nullify their previous form and characteristics, which ran contrary to the Torah.
It says, you will serve God on this mountain. In other words, what is step one? Service. What does service imply? Not what you want to do, what He wants from you. You've got to, he says here, you got to go contrary to your own nature, and the nature to nullify your previous form and characteristic. Take it further.
Furthermore, their service had to be carried out in the mode of a servant's service. Ta'avdun, a term rooted in the word eved, meaning servant, i.e., one who performs his work with bittul, accepting the yoke of his master.
What does servant do? Servant doesn't argue. He listens. A worker, boss says one thing, the worker says, yeah, okay, but maybe we can take another approach. And a good boss listens. A servant doesn't go, there's no back and forth. This is what it said, what you said. Do it. So here we're saying the Jews have to be servant. This is necessary.
This is necessary because in order to receive the Torah, one must make a commitment that mirrors the pledge the Jews made at Sinai. We will do and we will listen. With the promise we will do coming before we will listen.
What is it? We will do. They know what they committed themselves to? No. They had no idea what Hashem was going to tell them. But we'll do and we'll listen. Whatever you tell us, you get a blank check. And then we'll listen. That comes afterwards. You find out what He wants from you, and you study. That's the second stage we said before about becoming a kli, that you actually learn, you understand. But first is we will do. Just taking it in, being willing to give up your approach and take on what He wants.
Conversely, the Jews did not carry out the service of God in a manner that broke their being. Rather, this very service was an expression of the essence of who they were. To refer to a ruling of Rebbe Shimon ben Gamliel, fish in the sea do not intervene between the water and the person or object that touches them. In other words, the fish are considered as one with the water itself. Similarly, the Jews in the Torah are like fish in the sea.
Rebbe is taking a halacha. Halacha is like this. If you go to mikveh, you can't have anything intervening in your body and the water. You take off all your clothes, those goes nothing in between. What happens if you go into the mikveh in the ocean or lake, and you have a fish next to you? Is the tefillah, is your immersion kosher or not? Rebbe Shimon ben Gamliel says, yeah. You know why? Because fish were created from water. They're basically water. Yes, they're a separate entity, but no, they're water. That's halacha, but it's a strange halacha, and I'm not even sure if it's totally accepted. But what? I don't know. I have to look into it. He brings down the footnote. Yeah, he says the halacha doesn't follow this view. Yeah, okay. So get it. But the idea here is because this is who they are. This is who the fish is. It's water. They don't intervene. Jews are like fish in water. A Jew and Torah are one fundamental entity. Torah is who the people are. In other words, this idea of tabdun, that you give yourself over entirely, you give a blank check, doesn't mean you're going against who you are. It means you're identifying with who you are. In other words, take the next one. There's no free man.
In a similar vein, we can understand our sage's statement, there is no free man except one who occupies himself with Torah study. This is difficult to understand. On the surface, the Torah requires service, accepting the yoke of servitude to God. However, accepting this yoke enables a Jew to be free. Since the true nature of a Jew, as he was created, is to carry out the Torah's mitzvos, as the Mishnah teaches, I was created to serve my Creator.
Here's the thing. You're told you have to keep the Torah as abdus, something which breaks your nature. Wait a second. It's breaking. It's not. No. But what do you mean breaking? It's really you're becoming who you are. There's interesting law in the Rambam. A sacrifice has to be given b'ratzon, has to be given willfully. In other words, if you force a person to give a sacrifice, the sacrifice is not acceptable. What happens if he has to bring a sacrifice he doesn't want to? The law is kofi moso ad shel merozani. We beat him, we pressure him until he says, I want to bring it. Now wait a second. He really wants to? No. Even if he says it after you beaten him, if I want to do it, it's just so you stop beating him. So Rambam explains that. He says, no, what does a Jew really want? A Jew really wants to keep the Torah mitzvahs. Why does he say no? Because his Yetzer Hara is forcing him against his own natural tendency. Who he really wants to be is the Torah Jew. But his Yetzer Hara is getting in the way, pushing him otherwise. When he's beaten, what's being beaten? The Yetzer Hara. He's not beaten. And the Yetzer Hara is being beaten. His body, the Yetzer Hara shuts up and lets his true godly nature speak. And he says, Rosami, I want. Same thing here. When we're saying that Torah requires abdus, servitude, it means Torah requires that you be who you are. Not something different. You're not serving somebody else. You're serving your own true nature. You really want Torah mitzvahs. That's what it says. There's no free man except one who occupies himself in Torah study. You think you're free? What are you doing? You're chasing Yetzer Hara. You're chasing this goal and that goal, and this is what I want. That's what I want. You're on a treadmill of desire. You were talking about something totally different. You're in tune with your true nature. Oh yeah, it's going to require you to work even more than you would sometimes want to do. That's who you are. So, and he says, I was created so to serve my Creator. That's who I am. Therefore,
when a Jew does not carry out the Torah's mitzvahs, it may appear to him that he is free without a yoke, and this is so much easier for him. Nevertheless, since living a life that is not in accord with the Torah is the opposite of his true being in nature, it is backbreaking labor. This term is used in line with our sage's teaching that the backbreaking labor which Egyptians imposed on our ancestors, involving the men performing the tasks of women and the women performing the tasks of men. Although it is seemingly easier for a man to perform the task of a woman, a man will consider that as groundbreaking labor because it runs contrary to his habit and nature. It is specifically through the work and servitude of the Torah that a Jew becomes truly free, because though such service that he expresses his genuine self.
He's explaining what does Zman Chevaseda teach us? To be one with your true self. What is, like, back labor? I hate working in the kitchen. What can I tell you? I do it, occasionally, not as much as my wife would like. I'll make supper, I'll clean up the dishes, I'll do this, I'll do that. I don't like it.
On camera.
What?
You're on camera.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but I like it. The truth is, like, my wife knows it.
No, okay. He does it anyway.
No, but the truth is, my wife knows it. I mean, and like we're okay with it. So this is something very natural. The person wants to do he likes to do what is natural for him. Anything else, even though he does it, it's backbreaking later. Now, what does a Jew really want? We said before, to keep the Torah and mitzvahs. His Yetzer Hara is going to push him otherwise. That's backbreaking labor. So we've had first of all Chag matzos, bitul, lie flat. Then Zman Chevaseda, realize what is in line with your true nature. Now 3.
See, the giving of the Torah brought about a radical and distinctive change in the Jewish people. The extent of this change is such, even though the Jew's service on the surface involves limited and measured actions, according to the bounds of his own existence, the inner dimension of the service is connected with the giver of the Torah. As such, it transcends all limits and measures.
What is mitzvah? Mitzvah, Lashon Sapsa, the Chibur mitzvah, comes from the same root of Sapta, which means connection, being together. When a Jew does a mitzvah, he's together with Hashem. At that moment, he's a totally different person than ever before. He's different. He's just not of this world at that point. He's connected to Hashem. Now we see the 3 stages.
This 3-stage motif is reflected in the 3 names: the festival of matzos, the season of our freedom, and the festival of Pesach. Matzah represents bittul, does not rise or inflate. The name, the festival of matzah, indicates that this bittul becomes assimilated within the Jew's being.
And you eat matzah. You make it part of yourself. That's the first stage. Sense of bitul. Since we want to go to something new, you've got to do this stage of bitul. Season of our freedom.
Our freedom indicates that the bittul will permeate and becomes incorporated within his identity to the extent that he perceives that the true conception of freedom is submitting himself to God's will and experiencing joy. Pesach means jump, reflecting the radical leap that took place and had to take place within the Jews. The Jews' identity, which resulted from the radical leap in the expression of godliness from above that occurred during the exodus from Egypt and the giving of the Torah. The Jews were thus motivated to rise above their limitations, to become one with unlimited godliness, assuming an identity that went far beyond their individual selves.
That's the 3rd stage. You're suddenly no longer the same person you were. You're now operated on a godly frequency. You're connected with Him. So Pesach, bitul, because to go to that new stage, you've got to leave your previous state. Zman Chevaseda, realize that this new stage is expression of your real, genuine identity. This is who you really are. And in Pesach, it actually happens. You become bound with Hashem, and you step above your ordinary being. Picking up the lesson of the world.
No place for sadness. One of the lessons that every Jew can derive from the above and apply in his own divine service is as follows. The beginning step of divine service, its fundamental dimension and root, is fear of Hashem and the acceptance of God's yoke, serving Him as a servant. However, This divine service should not be carried out with sadness in a manner that involves breaking oneself, because a Jew's fundamental identity is godly, as it is written, your people are all righteous.
They said, well, this is who you are. So on one hand, yes, you've got to break your Yetzer Hara self, but only Yetzer Hara self. It's really, you're really tuning into who you are, and therefore it's in the motif of joy.
Sadness and breaking oneself is only necessary when a person has erected barriers and dividers separating him from Hashem. Then he must first break them, breaking the klipos by breaking his own heart and embittering his soul. However, the concept of breaking oneself does not exist within holiness in its own right. Bitterness, a broken heart, and a humble spirit are necessary only because of the body and the animal soul, during the times when they rule over a person, heaven forbid. Then the person's broken heart and bitterness of soul, which stem from the attribute of might within holiness, nullify the rule of the body and the animal soul.
Happiness, natural joy, in Torah mitzvahs, that's who a Jew really is. And you see, like Torah people, they're genuinely happy. But why? Because that's just like who you are, what you do. I'm in tune with my real self. There are times when, a person that feels a certain, I gotta do tshuva. I did things wrong. And then there's bitterness, real bitterness. Because you want to clean out the garbage in your system. You got to clean out the garbage. Garbage isn't pleasant. So, but that's a temporary stage to get rid of the garbage. It doesn't say who you are. Who you are is just the natural expression of the godly soul, and that's full of joy.
None of this is inherently relevant to the godly soul. Being broken is not appropriate for it, only happiness. This also explains the well-known story regarding the Alter Rebbe, who possessed a silver tobacco box that did not have a cover. The Alter Rebbe had removed the polished cover to use as a mirror, to adjust his head's fill-in so that they would be aligned exactly with the place between his eyes.
What happened? This is a translation, and the Rebbe told the story short. A rich man came to the Alter Rebbe with a present, a silver tobacco in the box. What the Rebbe says, what I need this for? Hey. So the guy says, well, take off the cover, and you can use it as a mirror for your tefillin. Well, I said, okay, that's a kedusha. That's something kedusha I can use for. And so, listen. So what happened? The story was told in the presence of the Senate.
When the story is told as in the presence of the Tzemach Tzedek, the one relating it said that the Alter Rebbe broke the cover off the tobacco box. The Tzemach Tzedek commented, "My grandfather propensity was not to break, neither to break himself, nor to break others. He certainly did not break it. It can be assumed that the cover was attached to the tobacco box with a thin rod, and my grandfather removed the rod."
The way the guy calls it, he broke it. No, the Zayda my grandfather didn't break anything. He must have been something connected. They take out. What was the Tzemach problem?
On the surface, one who has to wonder why the Tzemach Tzedek could not accept the idea that the Alter Rebbe broke off the cover. He would have been doing it for the sake of a mitzvah. It would have not been an act of purposeless destruction. However, this relates to the concept mentioned above. By its very nature, the concept of breaking does not inherently exist within the realm of holiness. Therefore, it was clear that Tzemach Tzedek, that the Alter Rebbe did not break off the cover.
This idea of breaking anything, just not fit. Holiness is whole. When you got to deal with the Yetzer Hara and that stuff, then you got to break. But if you're in your own natural state of holiness, no breaking.
For this reason, the bittul and the acceptance of the yoke that is demanded as the beginning step of divine service in the service of the godly soul itself does not leave a person broken. On the contrary, it generates pleasure and vitality. The person realizes that this is the true freedom, that this is his genuine identity as a Jew.
So now we start with Chag HaMatzos. Matzos is this selflessness, bitul, like we said before. And you think that's hard. No. That's Manche was saying, this is the season of our creed, this is where you become who you really are. And that just is a natural feeling of joy. And that leads you to Pesach, jumping forward to a higher, new and different identity, becoming really a different person, a Torah person, something you weren't before.